Hi. So glad you're here for week 3 of this I Will campaign. And this weekend we're talking about a super fun word called sacrifice. So just buckle the old safety belt because it's going to be a blast. My name's Kevin, if we haven't met, and Pastor Bob is in Israel this weekend. And so I am sorry. That's all I can say. Sorry, you're stuck with me for the weekend. And so glad that you're here, that you braved the elements, that you made it. And so want to say welcome, obviously, here in Bellingham. Also want to welcome our friends in Skagit, at the Skagit Valley campus. And just want to say thank you guys for setting that thing up, tearing that thing down every single week, and making the campus a reality down there. So thanks for doing what you're doing. And also want to say hi to our friends right now in South Florida, and we kind of hate your guts. But we're glad you're here with us. And again, I grew up in South Florida. I grew up about 45 minutes north of Boca, where you guys are, and went to high school in West Palm Beach. And so glad you're here as well. And if you'll allow me just for a second to reminisce about high school. When I was in high school, I played a lot of sports. And one of the sports I played was basketball. It was a small private high school, so I got a lot of chance to play a lot of sports. Played some basketball. And the thing is, and I'm really not trying to sound arrogant here. I'm not trying to toot my own horn too much. But if you were to make a list of really all the basketball players at that time in the state of Florida, I would have been on the list. And I would have definitely made it. And it's amazing that God's kept me so humble despite my absolute averageness in athletics. So I just want to thank him for that. And so so I played some basketball. I was okay at it, and we were actually a pretty good team, and we were actually pretty decent. So we had this game coming up, and it was against a school called Upper Room Christian, and their mascot was the Fighting Christians, which just sounds like a lot of churches that I've heard of. And so the Fighting Christians came to town. It was like this big deal, right? And the thing when the Fighting Christians came to play you was they had this player who was remarkable. I mean, he really was phenomenal. He was like 6'13", and just, huge wingspan, could jump out of the gym, and just a phenomenal talent. The only downside to this guy was his name was Bobo. And so Bobo and the Fighting Christians came to play, which just sounds like a bad 80s metal band or something, like Bobo and the Fighting Christians. And so they came to play. And when Bobo would come to town, a lot of press would come with him, a lot of media attention. There were colleges, universities that were scouting out Bobo. There was a lot of talk that he would probably be a professional basketball player someday. He really was a talented guy, really great player. And so Bobo and the Fighting Christians, we're playing them, and we're in the fourth quarter, and it is a tight game. I think it was 68-68, and we were winning. And it was real tight. It came down to the wire. And I was actually having a really good game that night. And again, there's a lot of press there. There's a lot of cameras, a lot of media attention. So I was having a pretty good game that night. There came a point late in the game, it was in the fourth quarter, where our point guard, his name was Nick Curley, and we just called him Curly. And so Curly came down, and Bobo's in the low post. Curly came down and stole the ball from him. And so Curly stole the ball from Bobo. And you just can't make this stuff up, unfortunately. And so Curly steals the ball from Bobo, and I see Curly look up, and he's looking down court. And I'm thinking, this is my shot. So I, with my keen instinct, start sprinting down the court with everything in me. And I've got my hand up, and I'm looking back, and I'm thinking, I am all by myself at this end of the court. And he's going to throw this ball to me. I'm going to catch it. I'm going to go up. I'm going to dunk it with 2 hands. I'm going to high-five every person in this building. And then they're going to put me up on their shoulders and dump Gatorade over my back. And then I'm going to have shoes named after me. It was unbelievable. And I thought, and if it doesn't happen, I'll go to school and college and play guitar and be a worship pastor. So it's one of the two. They're real similar situations. So I couldn't decide which one it was at that moment. So I'm running down the court, and I turn back around one more time. And Curly is now on the ground. He's laying on the ball. And I turn around because this is my moment. This is my time to shine. I yell back, Curly, get up and throw me the ball. And then I see that the game has kind of stopped. And training staffs from both teams and coaches and referees are now breaking up something, and they're holding Bobo back, and they're tending to Curly on the ground, and they pull Bobo off the court, and as they do, Curly gets lifted up off the ground, and he's bleeding like out of his eye socket and out of his nose. And apparently Bobo had a little bit of an anger issue and had punched Curly straight in the face for stealing the ball, and then on his way down, he kneed him in the head, And so Curly had a pretty good concussion. This is why Bobo never played professional basketball. So just a lesson, kiddos. So they took Curly to the hospital. He had to go to the ER. He had a concussion. Things were pretty bad. So after the game was over that we won, I went to the hospital to visit. And I think I didn't know what to take a do with the concussion, so I took him like Skittles or something. And I had like this bag of Skittles, because that's what you do, right? And I show up to the hospital. I remember like kind of going into his room, and I'm like, "How you feeling, man? You okay?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm feeling a lot better now, man. That was rough." And I was like, "Yeah, it sounds pretty bad." I said, "Man, so he just punched you in the face?" He was like, Yeah. The last thing I remember is Bobo punched me in the face, and then I remember hearing you yell, 'Curly, stand up and throw me the ball.'" Like, but I brought you some Skittles. I don't know what you do in a situation like that. And the thing that's amazingly apparent to me in moments like this is you realize how unbelievably selfish we are as humans. And we are, and we don't want to admit it. Nobody would say, "You know what, I'm super selfish and I'm cool with that." Nobody says that. You don't see this in online dating profiles. Like nobody's going, "Yeah, I love scarves in the wintertime. I love wearing paisley. I love jazz music, and I love being selfish." Like nobody says that. We don't say those things, but it's true of us, and it's something that we are, whether we want to admit it or not. And in this whole campaign, this I Will campaign, this whole thing came from a verse in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. And I want to read it tonight, not in the NIV, which we've been using the NIV through the entire series, but in the NLT, in the Living Translation. I love the way that it's put because it counteracts our selfishness. It talks about specifically our selfishness. It says this, "Then Jesus said to the crowd, 'If any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross daily, and follow me.'" You must turn from your selfish ways. And as I thought about that, I was thinking, how do you do that? Like, how do you counteract selfishness? What does that? And I think the only thing that does is the thing that is sacrifice. Sacrifice counteracts selfishness. It's probably the only thing that does. In fact, this week when I was reading the dictionary, because we all read the dictionary every week, right? I came across the word sacrifice. And actually, this is what it means. The act of giving up something that you want to keep, especially in order to get or do something else or to help someone. This is literally, right? Like this is literally the exact opposite of selfishness, right? Like you see that definition, that you're giving up something you want to keep in order to do something better, in order to do something different, in order to help somebody else. It's a totally different thing. And I think we go from selfishness to sacrifice, and I think our lives are naturally wired this way. I think we like God actually sets it up this way. I mean, think about it. When you're young, selfishness is normal, right? Like the world revolves around us when we're young. Like we know that. And as we get older, maybe it's the first time you moved out of your parents' house, or you went to school, you went to college, whatever, and you had to learn what sacrifice was, even just to make ends meet. You start going, okay, to make rent this month, I got to give up this thing. I can't do that. Or relationally, I've only got so much time. I'm going to be with these people, not these people. And that's kind of, you start learning a little bit of sacrifice, that you only have so many things, and you got to start to prioritize. And then sacrifice comes into play, especially after you, like let's say you get married. And you start to learn about sacrifice, and you learn when you're married how selfish you really, really were. Because suddenly your time, your energy, your resources, they're no longer your own. They're also shared with this other person. And they have a say in those things because you're now one person. And you learn how selfish you are when you get married. And then you have kids, and kids just mess you up. Like, I think it's in a positive way, but man, they mess you up. And they take up, like, you have kids, and suddenly they take all of your energy and your time and your energy and your resources and your energy and your money and your energy. And there's a theme in there somewhere. And they take up a lot of space. But it's amazing to me that when they hand you this little baby, and the first time they hand you this blob of a human, like in the hospital, and you're handed this thing, and you're like, I mean, really, they hand you this little blob that you're like, I just named you. I don't know anything about you. I was terrified to have kids because I looked at the percentage of humans I like on this earth, and I thought, it's not a huge percentage. So what's the chances the kid I have will be one of them that I like? Just percentage-wise. I'm just playing the odds here. And so I was terrified to have kids. And I just remember they hand you this baby, they hand you this little human, and you look at it and you think, I don't even know you. I don't know anything about you, but I would give up everything that I have to make sure you have everything you need. And you learn sacrifice. As our lives go on, we learn to sacrifice more and more and more. We go from selfishness to sacrifice. And tonight I want to look at a story of that exact thing. It's a very common story. It's a very familiar story. And so I want to try to look at it through a new lens of going from selfishness to sacrifice. And it's the story of Zacchaeus, and again, you know the story. But some friends of mine made a video in Australia of this story, and let's just face it, Australian accents are cool. And so Jesus with an Australian accent is like the next level. It's super cool. So let's watch this refresher. If you don't know the story of Zacchaeus, this will catch you up, and then we will dive into this story tonight. So let's watch that video.
In ye olde Bible times, in a little old town called Jericho, there lived a bad dude named Zacchaeus, or Zach for short. He was a greedy tax collector. He cheated people out of their own money and didn't even give it back to them. Everyone thought he was a total bozo. On this particular day, Jesus came to town. It was pretty exciting because people had heard about the epic things Jesus had been doing. He was kind of like a famous celebrity, and people were hoping maybe Jesus would speak to them, say hi, or even pump out a few miracles.
Hey, JC, I've got a spare couch you can sleep on if you need somewhere to stay. I don't know, dude.
Zach wanted to see Jesus too, but because Zach was short, he could only see Jesus from up in a tree.
Zacchaeus, I'm gonna come stay at your house today.
Oh, not Zacchaeus. Stay at my place. We made brownies.
Maybe it was something Jesus said that day. Or maybe it was just the fact that Jesus himself chose to stay at Zach's house. But something changed inside of Zach, and he decided to believe in Jesus and start being a better bloke too.
But Zacchaeus, he's a sinner. Don't stay at his place, dude.
Sinner.
I came to earth to save sinners. And today, my friend Zacchaeus has found life, salvation.
And I've decided to give away half of my stuff to the poor. And I'll pay back all the money I cheated from you guys, and I'll pay it back times 4.
You're a poet and you didn't even know it.
Even though Zach was a bit of a bad dude, Jesus forgave him, loved him, and invited him to be his mate. The end.
So I'm just going to open up the altars, and you're welcome to come on down. And I don't think we need any other explanation there. The thing about the Zacchaeus story is that it's just a glimpse of something. And I don't know if you ever had this problem. Like growing up, I had this problem. My mom and I would go rent a video or something. And she had this uncanny ability to go and we'd pop in the video into the VCR, and kids, don't even worry about what that is. You pop it in, and she would always stay awake through the opening credits, and then she'd just be done. The credits were as far as she went. Then she'd fall asleep for about the next hour and a half. And then, right at the pinnacle of the film, when, everything's coming together and the action hero's about to save the day, the couple's about to fall in love, or the Mighty Ducks are about to win the Junior Goodwill Games, example, right when that would happen, she'd wake up and she'd look at me and she'd be like, what'd I miss? What'd I miss? And she wanted me to fill her in on the whole thing. I was like, you missed the movie. You missed the entire movie. That's what you missed. And she wanted me to fill her in on the whole thing. The thing with this story of Zacchaeus is it's actually a lot like coming in on the last 10 minutes of a film. There's a lot more backstory to this than what we think. There's actually a whole nother chapter to the Bible that really kind of sets this thing up. And so I want to go backwards and actually begin a little bit further back to explain what happens with Zacchaeus, because it's a great story, has a lot to teach us, but it's kind of just the climax of the film, not really the whole thing. So I want to go back. That happens in Luke chapter 19. I want to go back to Luke chapter 18, where Jesus sets up this parable. And there's a parable that he tells, and it starts with this. It says that Jesus, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. And thank God that's none of us in this room. None of us have anything to learn from this, because none of us have ever been too self-righteous and looked down on other people. So I think we can all learn from this right here. And he goes on, he says this. There were two fellas. Can we go to the next slide there, Joel? There we go. Two men went to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even this tax collector. And he really lays it out. First of all, we learn how loathed tax collectors really are. If he's putting them in this category, thank God, literally, that I'm not that guy. Thank God that I'm not a robber, an evildoer, an adulterer, or even this tax collector. That's how low on the totem pole these guys are. And he says, I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. Now, here's the thing about this Pharisee, is these are literally laws that he has to live by. These are boxes that he has to check. These are the things that he signed up for, that he agreed to, and these are the law that he has to follow. But they're obligation. They're rote. They're ritual. That's all this is. And he's saying, I do the things that I have to do. Not the things I want to do. I do the things I have to do. And thank God I'm not like this tax collector. Then it goes on to say that there's this tax collector who stood at a distance, and he would not even look up to heaven. But he beat his chest and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. So we have this joke that starts, a Pharisee and a tax collector enter the temple. And I don't know, it's like a bad joke or something. And then it goes into this situation where you've got this Pharisee who says, look how righteous I am. Look at all the boxes I know how to check. Look at all the things that I know how to do out of obligation. And then you have this other guy who just says, God, have mercy on me because I know my own sin. But the story doesn't end here. Jesus sets up this parable, but what he's saying is, I'm going to make this play out right in front of you. I'm going to take the storybook, and I'm not just going to tell you the story, but I'm actually going to make it happen. It's going to really come to life. And so the next piece, the very next interaction Jesus has, is with this guy we know as the rich young ruler. The very next interaction, he walks out of this conversation, and he goes in, and it says this, a certain ruler asked him, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, this is a huge question. Like, this is a big question. And I kind of like where this young guy is going with this, right? I kind of like that he's the guy that kind of asks the bottom line question. He's like, God, or Jesus, just tell me, what do I have to do? Like, what's the bottom line? What boxes do I have to check? What's the minimum requirements for me to get into heaven? And Jesus could have said, here's what I want you to do. You got to go buy this Point of Grace album, and then you got to wear this WWJD bracelet. And, he could have really lined it out and made a checklist, but he doesn't make a checklist. And Jesus answers him, why do you call me good? Jesus answers, no one is good except God alone. You know the commandments. You know the boxes to check. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother. He throws out all the boxes to check, all the commandments. You know the commandments, all the law. You know how to do that. And so the man replies, all these I've kept since I was a boy. Like, that's literally child's play. I've done all that. I keep doing that. So I guess I'm good, huh? And then Jesus, when he heard this, he throws out one more thing. Oh, by the way, yeah, you checked all the boxes, but here's the sacrifice that I'm going to ask you to do. You may have checked all the boxes. You may have followed all the law, but I want you to sacrifice something. And he throws this out there. You still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. And then it says, the next thing it says, when he heard this, the rich young ruler, when he heard this, he became very sad because he was very wealthy, which this line makes no sense to me. Like, I can't give everything I have away because I have it. Doesn't really make sense. It's not a real thing. Like, I can't stop watching TV because I have cable. Like, it's not a real thing. Or like, I can't stop drinking milk because I'm a Canadian. Like, it doesn't fully make sense. How much milk are people drinking there? I'm just wondering. Nobody has a lactose allergy, apparently. Anyways, that's a side note. But saying you can't do something because you can doesn't fully make sense to me, you know? And he says, no, I can't give that up because I can, because I have it. That doesn't fully make sense. But he's sad because he was very wealthy. And Jesus looked at him and said, how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. So the people around them start to talk, and they say, those who heard this asked, well, who then can be saved? If this dude who checks all the boxes and seems to have his life pretty well together can't do this, then who can? Like, who's the next person in line? Enter scene 2 of that parable that we read earlier. the Pharisee who knew all the rules, all the ritual, all the obligation, and then the tax collector. Enter scene 2 of this drama that he's unfolding. Now, to properly do this, because this is a story about Zacchaeus, I think we all need to learn it the same way I was taught it, and that's through flannel graph. And I think this is pretty critical to understand. Flannel graph is how God speaks best. I don't know if you know this or not. Has anybody else brought up with flannel graph? I don't think this was used in any other medium besides children's ministries. Like, there was no board meetings where they're like, we want to increase revenue this year by 5%. Here's a pie chart on a flannel graph. Like, nobody did this in any other medium. But somehow, these are really hard to find, by the way. It took me a while. So, we've got Jesus, and he's entering this town. It says Jesus entered Jericho. And this is apparently Jericho. And there are lions in Jericho. Those actually just came out of the Noah's Ark kit that I got with it. And anyway, so he's entering Jericho. And it says Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. And I kind of had to jimmy rig like a little Zacchaeus to make him fit. And here's the thing you may not know about Zacchaeus. But Zacchaeus was a wee little man. And a wee little man was he. And he climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. And as the Savior passed that way, he looked up in the tree and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. For I'm going to your house today. That's not actually in the Bible, but it's close. And what my question to you about that song is, what Scottish Sunday school teacher wrote this song? Who says wee little man? Like, oh, he's a wee little man. Like, I don't know where that came from. Anyways, that has nothing to do with this. And so it says that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. And we learn a ton from this verse alone about Zacchaeus. We learn a couple things. The first thing we learn, his name Zacchaeus, means it's actually Zacca. It's a longer name for Zacca. Zacca meant honest. Zacca meant pure. So his parents had very high hopes for him. The other thing that we learn about Zacchaeus is he was a chief tax collector and he was wealthy. Now, in those days, the tax collector basically got to apply for his own job by paying for it. Rome would come around, and it was all a part of Rome, and Rome would come and they would assess every tax region. They'd say, here's how much money we want from this region, here's how much money we want from this region. This is a wealthier region we expect more from, a poorer region we expect less from. And then they would say, so this is how much we want. Now, who wants to go collect those things? And you would actually apply by paying your way in. You would bid on the job. And then if you got the job, you were now the chief tax collector of that region. Now, they would say, we expect this much from your region, but you can choose to charge people as much as you want. You get to skim as much off the top as you want. And that's your keep. That's your take home. So it's one of the few jobs in the world where you literally got to look around at the people in your village, the people that were in your community, your friends, your family, and say, how much money do I want to take from them? So these weren't well-liked guys, to say the least. This is like the worst form of the IRS of all time. Like, this is real bad. Not liked guys. And so Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector and he was wealthy, which shows us he was taking more than he needed. He was cheating people out of their own money, his friends, his family, his community. So that's what we learn. It says Zacchaeus, he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. Now, that's a nice way to put it, but this is the way it says in the ESV. And the ESV says a little different. He was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature. Now, what this means, there's actually a caustic verb right in here of on account of the crowd. There's actually a caustic verb, meaning the crowd was actually working against him. They were actively trying to keep him away. He was not a well-liked guy. They were here in their little huddle right here with their dog, and they were all real happy, but they were keeping him out. They were Red Rovering him out of the situation. And they were trying to keep him away. But because he was small in stature, he couldn't fight his way through. So it says he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see Jesus, since Jesus was coming that way. So we've got Zacchaeus. He runs ahead, and he climbs up in a tree, and this is literally exactly what it looked like. That's what's amazing, is we've replicated it perfectly here. when Jesus reached the spot, when Jesus got to where Zacchaeus was, when he actually got, and what it means, when he got to the spot, that means he was actually right where Zacchaeus was. He wasn't way down the path. He didn't yell to Zacchaeus. He got to where Zacchaeus was, and when he did, he looked up to him. And he says this, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Which, is that not weird a little bit? Like Jesus gets to him, and he stops, and he looks up at him, and suddenly Jesus shows him mercy. Jesus shows him grace, and Jesus says, I know nobody else here wants to talk to you, Zacchaeus. Nobody else likes you, to be quite honest. I'll talk to you. Let's hang out. And why does he want to go to his house? Have you ever thought about that? Like, why don't they just go to the local Starbucks situation? I don't know what it was at the time. Why don't they just go hang out somewhere nearby? Why do they have to go to his house? Do you imagine what that looks like to go into a rich man's house who all of their stuff has come from the pockets of everybody around them? Jesus only asked twice in the New Testament for money, and both times he says, I don't have any money. And now he's going to walk into a posh, lavish lifestyle. He's going to walk into the mess that Zacchaeus has created. And that's the thing about Jesus, is he loves walking into messes. He loves walking into the places that he wants us to sacrifice because he knows there's a mess there. And Jesus says, I want to walk into that with you. And so then it says this, it says he welcomed him, he came down at once and he welcomed him gladly. And then all the people started to say, they began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner, which means they've now exited the scene. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. And the next line we see, it's a quick jump. It's like an abrupt thing. All of a sudden, but Zacchaeus stood up and said, so we're now in his house, and all of a sudden he's declaring something. He says, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. I love this if right here. If I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Now, we don't know what Jesus said before this. We don't have any precursor to this. It doesn't tell us that Jesus gave him a 5-step plan or a project or something to make this happen. In fact, Jesus may have said something so unremarkable that it didn't even matter to write it down. But his presence alone was enough to convict Zacchaeus of a sacrifice he needed to make. And I think that's true when we allow Jesus close enough to our messes. There's a conviction there of a sacrifice that we need to make, and we need to be willing to make that. And Zacchaeus jumps right to his feet and says, look, Lord, I'll do it. And in fact, he goes way over and above. He says, if you go back to that last slide, he says, here and now, I give half of my possessions to the poor. That was not necessary. He didn't need to do that. He just did it. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Now, there is a Levitical law on this. If you go back to the book of Leviticus, there are laws. Actually, there's 4 types of laws of how you need to repay somebody if you've cheated them. And the top law actually says you should give back 200%. If you've cheated somebody, you need to give them back what you took from them, so 100%. And then you need to give back another 100%. So if you took 2 goats, you owe them 4 goats. That's kind of the way it worked. And Zacchaeus is going way over and above. He's like, whatever, I'm giving 4 times the amount, which is crazy. He's given this shot, and my favorite part about this verse is he says these words, I will. I will. I think a lot of times you and I, we get hung up on words like I could. I mean, notice the difference between this rich young ruler and Zacchaeus. Notice the difference between the Pharisee and the tax collector. Notice when this rich young ruler comes along, Jesus gives him a shot at it. He goes, here's what you need to do, sacrifice. I need you to sacrifice something dear to you. I need you to give up something because it's holding you back. Sacrifice that. Then come follow me. He's given a shot at it. Then there's Zacchaeus. He's given the same shot, and he doesn't say, I could do that. Oh, that'd be a good idea. I should do that. He jumps all the way to, I will do that. Zacchaeus will do that. And that's what separates the two. That's what separates these two guys is the I will statement. And for you and I think a lot of times we get stuck on words like I could, I should, I might. Be a good idea too. I mean, think about the things in your life, no matter what it is. I could write that novel. I could learn that instrument. I could be with my kids more. I could work harder. I could get the job that I love. I could, whatever it is. I could spend my money wisely. I could volunteer in some capacity somewhere. Those kind of things. I could do those things. And we get really good at I could. But the only thing that moves us from I could to I will is sacrifice. Think about the things in your life that you want to do. Think about anything you want to do. Whether it is I want to learn that instrument, whether it is I want to write that novel, whether it is I want to be with my kids more, whatever it is, whatever those situations are in life, every bit of that from going from I could to I will, the thing that moves you along, the catalyst between those two places is sacrifice. It's going to take sacrifice to go from I could to I will. And that's what Zacchaeus does here. Last week, Pastor Bob had us write on these cards that you see around the auditorium, and they're in Skagit as well, and on a board there. And we wrote down these things that we feel like God has told us to obey him. And there were a few cards, and I'm really not trying to, I wasn't trying to be creepy with these or anything. I'm not creeping on anybody. We took some of the cards down, and we realized as a staff we should probably start praying for these things, because we wanted to see people actually become I will people with the things they wrote down. And these are just a few examples. I don't know whose these are. I don't have any ideas. There's just a couple things that we saw. But I will ask forgiveness from a coworker. I will give up control. I will go on a mission trip. I will forgive. I will trust you to heal my marriage. I will sacrifice my comforts of my schedule. I will surrender my hard heart to you. I will stop making excuses. I will wait until marriage to have sex ever again. I'll spend quality time with my wife and kids. I will continue to flee from sexual immorality. I will remove the data from my smartphone. I will follow you onto the mission field. I will surrender my finances to you. I will get baptized. I will continue to love my spouse and fight for our marriage. I will give a full tithe of 10%. I will tame my tongue. I will give up control. I will go on a mission trip. I will forgive. That's just a few of them. There were so many cool things written last weekend. And our prayer was that it wouldn't just be a I could. I wrote down this thing and I could do that. That'd be a cool thing to do. But it would go from I could or I should do those things to I will. I'm going to do that. Very different scenario. And the thing that moves us from I could to I will is always sacrifice. At the end of what Zacchaeus says, when he finishes with that whole rant about here's what I'm going to do, Jesus says that salvation has come to this household today. It didn't come to the rich young ruler when he walked away from it, but it's come to this house today because this man too is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And we are called to sacrifice, to follow Jesus, just like this. And so there's another verse where Paul writes later on. He writes these words, and he writes in Romans 12, he talks about sacrifice a little bit. And in Romans 12:1, it says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, because God has been merciful to you, to offer your bodies, everything that you are, as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." Not because of obligation, not because of guilt, not because of routine, not because of ritual, but because God has been merciful to you, because Jesus will step into your mess. Give everything that you are. I encourage you to make every part of you a living sacrifice to God. When I first started into ministry, I was 18 years old. I went to college, and 3 weeks after I got to college, this church approached me and said, "Would you come work with our students?" And they're like, "We'll pay you $7 a year." And I was like, "I'm in." And so I started working at this church, and I was a youth human. I don't think I was a pastor. I don't even know what I was. I was 3 months older than the oldest kid in the youth group. And so I was a freshman in college, and I started working at this church. Well, the youth group did well. We started to grow and whatnot. And this church was rigid. I mean, it was all about the routine, the ritual. They loved that kind of stuff. And it was very staunch, very rough place to be as far as that went. So the youth group started to grow, and they came to me and they said, what if you started doing worship? And I was doing worship at our college and stuff. They found that out. What if you did worship for us? And I was like, well, I don't really do the piano and organ situation great, but I'm willing to try it out. And they're like, okay, great. So I took on the worship gig, and I don't think there was anybody under 1,000 years old at this church. Like, I'm pretty sure Elijah actually came back and was a part of our congregation. I think I saw his name on a Connect card one time. And they were like, they said, why don't you update our worship, bring us forward a little bit. So I had planned this first week that I was in charge of this. I'd planned this beautiful ceremony, and there was going to be like an hour-long altar call at the end because it was going to be awesome. People were going to get saved left and right. It was going to be amazing. And I was so stoked for this, and so we were changing a few things even that first week, and I was pretty excited about it. And so I showed up to the church that Sunday morning, and a couple wrenches got thrown into my plan. First, there was a man there from Africa, and I had never seen this guy before, and he had never been to our church before, or our country, I don't think either. And he brought me this poster, and he pointed to it, and it said on it, I'm doing a healing service tonight. Bring your deaf, your dumb, your blind, your lame, even your dead, and I will heal them. And I was terrified. And I was like, you want to stay for service? You want to hang out? So he stayed for service. So that guy was there. Then there was another dude who was a pastor, and he was a retired pastor in the area, and he happened to be at service that day. So our pastor came to me. He said, Kevin, what would you think about him praying for the offering? I was like, that's cool. That's fine. So we get done with kind of this worship set. We're going into the offering time, and they had this dude come up and pray, this retired pastor. So he comes up, and homeboy, he prayed forever. I mean, it was the longest prayer, and I'm all for praying, but holy cow. Like, I think he was praying for every state, and then every country, and then every congressman by name. I mean, it was like unreal. I mean, we were getting to that place where it was like, okay, bro, I think we just started over again. And I mean, it just went forever. It was literally a 20-minute prayer. I'm not exaggerating. It was 20 minutes of praying. So we're all standing there, kind of holding on to the pew in front of you kind of deal. And then we get done praying, and I look around, and I'm the only one standing because everybody else has given up hope, and they're sitting down. And so he gets done, which were not exactly the way I had this scheduled, the way we had it planned out. And then our pastor gets up. He starts to speak. And he's like maybe 2 minutes into his message, maybe not even that far. Barely gets going. And a dude in the back, he goes, Pastor, I think we're going to need some help back here. And there's a gal next to him, his wife, is completely sprawled out, and she's not breathing. And she's like this. And everybody looks back, and so our pastor leaves the stage and comes back to the back. As he goes to the back, the African healer jumps into action, because apparently the guy can sniff out a good heart attack when in town. So he comes running to the back. We don't know this guy. He grabs her by the shirt, and he starts shaking her, and he yells, Jesus, 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 Jesus. And we're like, could you let go of her, please? And our pastor's like, could you unhand her and go pray for her in the back? So he goes to the back. He's standing up against the wall. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And it's just echoing through the whole place. Meanwhile, now that some of our first responders are there, and we have some ENT people in the building, they go over, and they're kind of trying to talk to her and see what's going on, and she's not responding, but we still got Jesus going on. Well, then I go to the guy who can pray. And I'm like, hey, you're a prayer person. I didn't want to call him a warrior because I didn't want to put him at that level because it was terrifying. But I said, you can pray for a long time. Why don't you come with me? Why don't you pray for her? Because I figured this guy could pray long enough to get the EMTs out, in and out by the time it's all said and done. So I go, would you come pray for her? He goes, yeah, I'll come up. So he comes up to the stage, and he stands behind the pulpit, and I go over and I grab a guitar just to put some mood music on, We call them prayer pads. And so I go play some music, and he starts to pray. He looks at me. He goes, do you know her name? Father, we pray for our sister there in the back. In Jesus' name, amen. I was like, you joking me, bro? That's what you've got? I guess you did use everything in the first run, so I don't think there's anything else left to do. But I was like, you got to be kidding me. So he looks at me and goes, do you know Come By Here? And I was like, I don't think so. He's like, Come By Here. Can you play Come By Here? I was like, I don't think I know that one. He's like, yeah, Come By Here. And I was like, can you sing it for me? He goes, come by here, my Lord, come by here. I go, kumbaya. He goes, yeah, come by here. So he just takes off into Come By Here in like the key of R sharp. I mean, it was the gnarliest thing. He was apparently not a musician. And so he just takes off, and I'm trying to find where he's at. I'm trying to kind of noodle along with him. I'm going, this is a disaster. So I'm trying to play some music and figure out where he's at. So he's singing Come By Here. Well, then we have Jesus guy in the back still. Jesus, Jesus, and come by here, my Lord. You know, that thing going on. And then we got the first responders going, we can't hear each other. The EMTs can't hear each other. But somebody else then decides to yell out, what if we sang hymn 727? That'd be great right now. So we have requests coming in. We have the EMTs. We have Jesus, man. And we got this dude singing Come By Here up front. And then there's this gal in the front of the church who was a very sweet gal, but she had this tick to her, and she would go, oh, whenever she got nervous, she'd go, oh. And I mean, it was bad. One time my wife is the sweetest woman in the world. One time this lady, her sister walked up to the stairs to play the piano, was walking up the stairs and fell down. And this lady started going, oh, my sister, oh. And my wife's like, yeah, I know your sister fell down. She did not know, and it's not her fault. But then she kicks in, so go, oh, and Jesus, Jesus. And the EMTs can't hear each other. Hymn 727, come by here, my Lord. Come by. I mean, it was an absolute disaster. So they actually take the woman, they get her on a stretcher, they take her to the ambulance, and our senior pastor hops in the ambulance too, and they take off. And the elder that's in charge at this point, apparently, comes up to me, comes up to the pulpit, he stands there for a second, he says, I guess we should still have that potluck we had planned, huh? And sure enough, we went right on with the potato casserole, following a good heart attack. The lady was fine, by the way. She was fine. She had apparently taken a couple too many pills. It was apparently that bad of a service that she was trying to get out of it. And so, and the thing I remember, even in that moment, and I remember being in this place going, there has got to be more than this. When we talk about our spiritual act of worship, it's got to be so much more than routine, than rote, than us coming into a room and every time doing the same thing and calling that our spiritual act of sacrificing and worship. And for the last 5 years, I've gotten to be a part of a church where I've stood shoulder to shoulder with people in Tijuana or in Vicente in Mexico, where people are rebuilding houses and giving hope to people because of the mercy Christ has shown them. They're showing it to other people. For the last 5 years, I've gotten to see people that come back from trips, and I've gotten to do the videos of people coming back from Peru or from Ethiopia with our partner church there, from Esperanza, from different places, and actually get to see their lives change because of the mercy Christ has shown them. They've gotten to show it to somebody else. And they've learned what sacrifice means. They've given up their time, their treasure, their talents. I see people every single weekend who come in here and make this a welcoming place from the doors, that greet us into this place, who give up time to teach our children every single weekend. And I see people that are willing to sacrifice, and they know that this is much more than just a rote, routine situation as our spiritual act of worship. I see people who come into this room, and this is obviously my personal favorite, but I've seen people over the last 5 years who come into this room, and they don't just come in to sing songs and see a program, but whether it's in Refuge or a weekend service, they come into this place and they don't just sing songs, but they give every piece of who they are to their God in sacrifice and say, make me who you want me to be because of your great mercy for me. Show me what I need to sacrifice even in this moment. And my prayer for us this weekend as a church body is that we would learn how to go from I could to I will. We would learn the sacrifice that needs to be made to take that next step and really be followers after Jesus Christ. And that's our prayer. That's what we want to see happen. And so I thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of a congregation like that for the last few years and getting to see that. And I pray that Cornwall is known as a church that will, not a church that could. So let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you for your example of sacrifice. When we look at sacrifice, we can look no further than what you did on the cross for us. And so, God, we thank you for that first and foremost. And secondly, God, I pray that you would teach us how to go from I could to I will. I pray you would show us the acts of sacrifice. God, whether it's already the step that we've identified in obedience, whether it's the step that we think we need to take next in our lives, whether it was through surrender, God, I pray that you would show us how to sacrifice to actually be obedient and to actually move forward in our relationship with you. Show us the things we need to give up, that we need to cut out. And God, I pray that you would work through this body of believers. Show us what sacrifice means. Show us that because of your great mercy for us, we can show mercy to others. I pray these things in your son's name, and everybody said together, Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for being here. And there's a prayer team could be down front here if you'd love to meet with them. That'd be awesome. There's also one in Skagit. They'll be right down front. And if you'd like to fill out more cards, they're on the sides, and we'd love to have you do that just to take that next step. And again, in Skagit, that's on a board there. So thank you so much, and have a great week. We'll see you next week as we conclude this series.